Paul Sinclair, it's great to talk to you. I feel we are kindred spirits in pursuing the same kind of topics. Can you tell me, are you doing this full time now, or?
Pretty much, George. Yes, it's, well, absolutely. Since probably 2011, when I packed in work, it's not an 8-hour job, and I think you know this better than better than any I would have thought. This is an 18-hour job. I never stop. There's paperwork constantly, up at silly o'clock, and still typing, still researching. Then out on the cliffs. We're in the forests this weekend. You know, Friday night, there's a group of us who are off into these forests where these strange occurrences have been happening, and we'll be spending 2 nights. I mean, we're quite fortunate, George, that the forests we go in, as you know, we haven't got bears, and so we can, apart from the risk of getting wet through and uncomfortable in a deep dark forest, we're quite safe. We're not going to get eaten unless we come across one of these cryptids.
That's right. You know, I saw the trailer for a film you've been working on for a while called Wolflands, and I had no idea that there were forests that were as big and thick and high trees in England. I think of it as, you know, pasture land and farms, but there's wild areas still in Yorkshire, the area where you're around, right?
North Yorkshire primarily, George. You know, and I think I spoke about it before to you, and there's 525 square miles of forest and moorland. And there's enough area there, if something had evaded sort of the eyes of the world, to hide. Me personally, George, I don't believe that we're dealing with something that's flesh and blood in the true sense of the word that we would think of as a horse or a bovine. I think there's something else happening here. And once again, we've got first-hand witnesses from all walks of life reporting and documenting seeing something very similar with no connection to each other, these people. And like I spoke to you before about, I think we've got to attach some semblance of truth to this. They're telling the truth. I mean, I've spoken to a gamekeeper who had an experience in 2002 in a forest called Cropton Forest, which is in the research zone. He found an abandoned farmhouse after he'd been working there for 2 years. He just went into a little clearing and he'd been working all around these forests. Like you said, the trees are between 60 and 100 foot high. And he'd never found this farm before, and it were abandoned. The doors just swinging wide open, and he used it as a base after that for a few years. So one particular evening, he's lit a fire in the hearth. We've documented this in Wolflands, George, and this guy's give us first-hand account. You know, no blurred faces or anything. Ex-Marine. I'll start a few days before. He's walking back to the farmhouse with his cousin, and a beam of light, a ball of light sprung up from the side of them, and he's an ex-Marine, and he immediately thought it was a tripwire flare, and he pushed his cousin to the floor, and they waited because they thought squaddies would be coming out of the forest, because we're not that far away from RAF Fylingdales. And nothing happened. The next day he went back looking for scorch marks, nothing. But after that, they started hearing strange chatter and voices in the forest, him and another gamekeeper. And then a few days after, one particular evening, he's lit a fire in the hearth. He's on his own. His cousin's gone home. And he wakes up in his sleeping bag, and he's kind of feeling uneasy. He said, and then all of a sudden, this thing come to the window. Now, we've been there, we've done the measuring, it's over 7 foot tall, and it's stooping down. And you can see the huge shoulders of this thing. And Jeff, is saying to me, I'm thinking, can it see me? Because there's only the glowing embers of the fire. And you can't see no glowing eyes, you can't see no gnashing teeth. He just sees this monstrous outline of this huge thing. And after a short time, it walks away. Well, being the kind of guy he is, and anybody watching Wolflands, when we've got it complete, will see what I mean. Former boxer, huge sort of figure of a man, imposing guy. He said, I couldn't settle. We kept hearing a baby crying in the forest. And me and the other gamekeeper, we'd walk to where we perceived we'd heard it, and then it would stop. And then it's almost as though it's luring us further in, because we'd hear it start up further in. He said, so a few nights later, I decided I put a tarp on the ground and I set up about 40 feet away. We know it's about 40 feet. It's cleared now, but it was forest up to within about 40 feet. And he said, and I waited. He said, I waited and anticipated during the night. He says, and this thing came out of the forest and went down the side of the farmhouse and stood looking in at the window. He says, but do you know what? He said, I think it knew I were there. You know, and Jeff perceived it, knew he was actually observing it. But what's interesting, George, and I think you'll have come across this before, he saw no leg movement. He said it just literally arrived, as in his analogy, as though he was moving a torch line down the building. It just arrived. So there we have something different. He talked about what I've called the lower silence, the sort of descent into the high strangeness. And then we're moving on to another part of the forest, and we go to 2018. This is for Wolflands here, George. You know, and there's 3 guys wild camping. And it was August. I can't remember the exact date. There's only 2 gone on camera. And the one who hasn't gone on camera, quite unusually for him, because he suddenly started saying, I don't like it, we're being watched. There's something watching us. He said, it's after midnight, Steve and Jimmy, the other 2. Said, and we couldn't leave the forest. It took us an hour and a half to get into this spot down an 800-foot ravine. We're not talking sheer drop, but it's very, very rugged territory. He said, and we just couldn't get out. He said, and then all of a sudden, in the darkness, 2 huge amber eyes lit up. And they were about 36 inch off the ground. And Jim said, he said, now I'm sort of worried because I can't, Jimmy's exact words, I can't think of an animal to assign these eyes to. He said, because they're huge. And I asked him, I said, well, the head compared to a cow or something. He goes, bigger. He said, our friend, he said, he's absolutely panicking, and we're having to console him and hold him. He said, so after about 30 minutes, I'd had enough. I realized that we're going to lose him in darkness. He said, and I stood up and I shooed it away. Or I went, shoot, that kind of thing. He said, and this thing disappeared. He says, and I turned round, he says, and then I saw the look on Steve's face and the other guy's face. He says, and the jaws had dropped. And this is where Steve chimed in. He says, I knew he'd not seen it stand up. I knew he'd not seen it. He said, and when I turned round, I thought, oh my God. And I'm actually using these guys' words, you know, because that's something I've got an habit of being able to remember things like. He said that from being 36 inch off the ground, I'm looking at eyes now that are 7 foot in the air. And in the backlight of the moon, he says, we're looking at this monstrous thing that stood like an American footballer, slightly tilted forward. He said, we thought it was growling at us, but it wasn't. It was its breathing. Now, I've been back in there with a surveyor's tape. It was 45 foot from them. We know roughly where it was. And every so often, it turned to its right. And he said, we could see a muzzle. And it was a dog. And Steve said, he said, there was no mistaking what it was. We knew, but we daren't say. And I'm sort of trying to coax this out of them. I'm saying, well, I wanted them to say what they thought it was. And Steve goes, well, it were a werewolf. And then Jimmy says, it were a dog, man. And he broke his words like that. And these guys, they've got nothing to gain and everything to lose by going on camera and telling me such a story. They hold down good jobs. I really trust their integrity, because the first time they told Steve was the first one to contact me, and he were in tears on the phone because he'd nobody to talk to about it at all. He'd not even spoke to his wife about it, his son and his daughter, and it were really messing his head up. And the first time that these guys met us, George, we met them on the edge of the forest, and they drove 2.5 hours straight from work to meet us. And we went into the forest just to show us the location. Since then, we've slept in the forest. We've spent nights in the forest with these guys. And it's been an highly emotional and incredibly charged kind of time. They're not going in with us this time, George, but these are the kind of things that people are seeing.
So the first story you told me about the thing that was kind of floating along, what was that? Was that a Dogman too?
Jeff feels that it was some kind of Dogman type creature. From we'll never know, will we? But from its behavior and size and demeanor, he didn't see us because it was looking down over the top of the window. And the crying, that's kind of associated with Bigfoot type phenomena. But I guess we'll never know. But we're not far. We're 7 miles from the forest where Jeff had his encounter. There's there's numerous other encounters, and the more that we get into this, that, you know, because a lot of these farmers and people local to the area, they don't want to talk to Paul Sinclair, some guy who's just arrived, and asking them really off the wall questions. But we've got a friend involved in the film who works in the area, and he's the common knowledge within the area is that people have said for years that there's a bear in that particular ravine. Well, we know there isn't a bear in the ravine. I mean, it would have been carnage, you know, and over, well, these reports are going back over 40 years that I've got to. And then if you go in folklore, East Ayton, which is probably 4 miles from these forests, there's the stories of what they call the Barguest of East Ayton. And if you're not familiar with the term Barguest, George, it's an upright, fur-covered animal, huge, with flaming or glowing red or amber eyes. And these stories go back well in hundreds of years. The Barguest of East Ayton, the huge black dogs on the eastern North Yorkshire coast at Whitby and Kettleness and at Hundale Point, and at a place called Beast Cliff, aptly named really, and Hundale Point, Hounddale Point, you know, hound, you know. So it kind of goes with the territory. And it's ironic when you think about it, that the things of the past are still being reported today. I just find it intriguing.
Can you tell me about the map behind you? Is that are those points where different kinds of phenomena happen?
Yeah, yes. I made this map when me and Chris Turner did Bringing Down the Light. It's huge, to be honest with you, George. And this is Flamborough Head, very close to where I'm living now. And the yellow dots signify the light form phenomena. The red dots are the mutilations that I was looking into in 2017/18. The green dots are the big cat sightings, and the blue are the cryptid sightings, you know, and they fill it all the way up the coast. There are white dots as well, because we've had missing people on this coastline as well.
Give me the broad strokes of why you started down this road and the depth and breadth of different phenomena that have been reported and that you have investigated in this area since 2002.
I started down this road, I'll briefly show you, because, well, I've Whitley Strieber to thank for getting me to write the books. Whitley contacted me a lot of years ago and encouraged me. And I wrote my own book then, the last one I wrote, The Night People, because of experiences that I'd had as a child. And that's sort of put me on that path. Then when we moved to Bridlington, which is where I am now, approximately 30 years ago, the interest never dwindled. It's just that life and a family gets in the way and it has to take a back seat. So I got more involved in it. I started buying decent cameras and trying to document the light form phenomena. From there, more people contacted me, big cat reports, you know, the panther type cats in the area. And from then, the Flixton reports, they were the most prominent cryptid reports, the accounts of the Flixton werewolf, which is approximately 11 miles as the crow flies from where I'm sat now. Flixton's a tiny village in North Yorkshire. In 937 AD, King Athelstan, who was a real king, built a refuge to protect travellers from an infestation of savage beasts, from wolves and an infestation of savage beasts, lest they be devoured. That's the old literature. And it was called the Carman's Spittle. Car as in C-A-R-R, it's the wetlands. And we've got these stories then, going back hundreds of years, of this bipedal creature that appears from time to time on the Flixton cars. And when I need to stress, as I said, the cars are an area of wetland. That's what it means when you have the double AR, reeds and elder. And once again, a vastly diverse spectrum of people that are reporting seeing this. You know, from guys driving timber wagons who claim that this thing's crossed the road, to people just dog walking, to people driving home on a night. We got one in between Flixton and a place called Muston. And in ancient words were Moonstone. There was a standing stone there years ago. And these two ladies contacted me coming home just before midnight, and they tell me that this thing just come down the side of a field, landed in the road in one jump, and then was away. Everything about it was all wrong. And they likened it to looking like the character from the Harry Potter film, Remus Lupin, the werewolf, which is an example that a few people have given for what's been seen on the cliff tops. Sorry, George, go on.
You mentioned about mutilations. How
Yeah.
many cases are you aware of? And I'm assuming mutilations, you're using it in sort of, because that's a common term, but they're not really mutilations.
They're not mutilations, George. I mean, the precision with which these, it's mostly sheep. And in 2017 to 2018, one particular farmer who I contacted and asked if he would mind if I helped him try and investigate what was happening. We didn't cover the unexplained phenomena. I just wanted to help him. And I went to these fields in between, I don't know, 4:30 and 8 a.m., 3 or 4 times a week. When I was finding these animals, ears sliced off, faces stripped of skin, eyes removed, no trauma around the eye socket. In some instances, rectal coring. And in some instances, it has to be said, the throat taken out, but it looked like you picture a paint scraper, a wedge had gone through the throat. It was a strange incision. But as we know, I'm sorry to sound macabre, but a sheep is a dirty white colour. There's no blood. There were no blood splatter or anything. And he lost over 50 sheep, as well as the sheep in this particular area. I was finding roe deer, which are probably fastest animal in the UK. And they were suffering a similar fate. I was finding badgers. The badgers were skinned around the waist and just left with the fur below them, and everything else skinned. And I was finding foxes. But on top of that, on the cliffs, very close to where these animals were being killed, we'll say, we've got the North Sea. Rock anglers and fishermen were taking pictures for me and alerting me and telling me to go look. And we were finding porpoise, the small dolphin, with huge holes through their jaws. So all of this was happening. So it was kind of marine based, airborne, and land based. And I never ever got to grips with what was doing it. And there were lots of people saying, "Oh, this is the work of people, some sadistic person or group of people." Now I could imagine them catching a sheep. Yeah, you know what I mean? I don't think I could at 58 years old, George, but I could imagine somebody being able to catch one. But not the roe deer, and not the fox, and not the badger, and not in the quantities that we were finding them. And once again, the total lack of blood. I mean, you cut some things ear off and there's going to be a lot of blood. And these were clear, crisp, precision cuts. I mean, I spoke at a conference called The Awakening a few years ago, and Linda Moulton Howe spoke there. And I spoke to her upstairs one-on-one for about an hour. She was really interested and she wanted to come back with me to the location. But I weren't being rude to Linda, but it just weren't possible. These people, they're not bad people, but they're very clannish, a bit like the trawlermen, a bit like miners, you know, and they've got their own little communities. And I've been fortunate to be friends with a few of them, and which has helped ease the way. But I think for a stranger to suddenly wade in and start asking questions, it wouldn't have got anywhere.
With the cryptid creatures, big dogs,
yeah,
big cats, these wolfmen, have you got any tracks?
No. I found some very large tracks at a place called Speeton, which is 2 miles up from Bempton a few years ago. If anybody wants to, they're probably on the truthproof.uk website. And I took some plaster casts, some plaster of Paris casts of them, and put a fist at the side of them. And they're very big. And I'm not really good with tracks. And I sent them to some friends of mine. And is it the Chickahominy Indian tribes? They were familiar with tracks of somebody who used to live and work with the tribe who I knew. And they just said incredibly large wolf. But once again, we don't have wolves native to the UK. So it's an interesting one. The lack of tracks, it's intriguing. One of the forests, George, close to where the gamekeeper saw this thing seemingly float down, 3 mountain bikers, and the forest is called Harwood Dale. They're up there, obviously doing what they do on the mountain bikes, and they became aware of a huge bipedal creature. They didn't say like a werewolf. They said it were like a bear, but with a almost primate face. And it's about 30 foot away in the bracken. Now it's all undulating and up and down and full of moss and water gullies. He said it was like it was on a track like they'd have a camera track, and he said it's just going down outside of us, and it's just, there's no lateral movement, there's nothing. And I mean, I got that story probably 5 years ago, but it's all tying in with what other people are saying. There's definitely something different. It's the descent into the lower silence, that strange electricity type feeling, that metallic taste, that people report time and time again that is not normal. And well, for any animal, never mind animals in the United Kingdom, to create that effect on the human being.
You have, do you believe that these Wolfman creatures are responsible for the mutilations, or that it's different phenomena all happen in the same place?
I don't think they are at all. I'd struggled. I mean, Rob, the paratrooper, who, when he said when we swore, George, he said, I thought it was an hyena at first, crouched down. That were quite close. And he said it had claws, but hands with claws on the ends of them. And I'm jumping back to your question. I don't really see that I guess we're trying to understand it in human terms. I realize that, but what would the purpose be of a creature like that, removing eyes with precision, removing ears? And I really don't get it. I don't think so. Long answer. Sorry.
So they appear to be physical at times, but you don't believe they're flesh and blood, meaning they come in and out of our reality?
I think there must be there's got to be some kind of thin area and where these things are manifesting. I mean, we've identified an area on the cliff tops, George, where I think I spoke to you about it a few days ago, where the fishermen claim to have seen the spaceship land on the hillside. It's the same area, or very close to where the paratrooper saw this hyena type thing. It's the same area where the light forms seem to be present, where myself and Lee Haywood saw these 3 huge globes of orange light low in the field, causing a halo effect and even lighting the bottom of the field. If we're to believe that the UFO phenomena, the light form phenomena, can come through from somewhere else, unless it's stealth and they're actually there all the time and just choosing to manifest, then why can't some other kind of life form? And whilst it's in the presence of our reality, whilst it's in our reality, well, who knows, maybe it can be killed, maybe it can be touched. Or is it just a hologram? Is that the reason why the guys in the forest, the 3 guys wild camping, never got hurt? But in that case, why could they hear it breathing? That implies a physical presence. It's a difficult one.
You began really this quest by looking at what you call ILF, this intelligent life form or light form, and UFOs. Can you share some of the cases and data that you've collected about both of those?
Well, the ILFs, the intelligent light forms, as I've termed them, when on the, I get into, I did before they digitized all the lifeboat logs and everything else. I used to go down to the lifeboat station and I'd look through their logs. They were kind enough. They didn't let me take them away, but they'd let me look through the logs. Year after year, decade after decade, George, we've got call outs from members of the public, MOP, police officers, Coast Guard, trained observers, to say that they'd seen orange or red spheres of light out over the sea. Anything from 2 miles to 20 miles out, depending on the altitude you are on the cliff tops. And sometimes they'd launch multiple lifeboats. And when I say sometimes, I don't just mean, it's only happened once or twice. The logs show it every year, that then multiple lifeboats from, say, Filey, Bridlington, Hornsey, all these different locations to search for a boat in distress or a downed aircraft, potentially. During the searches, they're reporting seeing the lights. So we're dealing with a definite visual, but after an all-night search, after a 7-hour search, and bearing in mind, George, these lights don't project from anywhere. They just switch on, switch off, and appear in a different part of the sky. After all this, the lifeboats come back to shore, no downed aircraft, no boats in distress, and the log concludes, false alarm with good intent. Now, I think, and particularly around the east and North Yorkshire coast, but probably where you are, along the coast anyway, where people are anywhere in the world, these logs will exist with this type of documentation. And we've got a wealth of information there that if we could only access it, we could maybe find patterns and really get our teeth into some proper documented, inadvertently, but documented unexplained phenomena, documented by Coast Guard and lifeboat agencies. You know, I mean, I've tried with Coast Guard. I did get information in early years, but it's very difficult. But probably, you know how it is getting information from people now.
You've been reading about what's happening in this country with UFOs and our military grudgingly giving up a little bit more information, and we're going to have to study these things. Give me your sense of where studying UFOs only will get us, because your work, your experience suggests that all these different kinds of things are happening in the same area. By studying only one of them, how likely are you to understand the big picture?
I think ufologists are probably missing a trick, and I have full respect for loads of people. I've not got any axe to grind with anyone, but what we're dealing with is at multi-phenomena areas. Whether it's a hive mind that's it might be too much for some people to imagine, and I'm not saying I subscribe to it, but whether it's one all-encompassing intelligence that's producing this, or whether in these thin areas the diverse phenomena can come through to create this paranormal soup, I don't know. But I do believe that the nuts and bolts UFO researchers should also be concentrating on the light form phenomena, the cryptids. I mean, you can't dismiss it just because it sounds so ridiculous when you've got so many credible witnesses, and I sound like a broken record, from all walks of life claiming to have seen these things. You know, we've got to attach some truth to it. Just because you've not seen it, and I don't mean you personally, George, but just because a person hasn't seen it does not mean it's a load of rubbish. So what I would say to the ufologist interested in the structured craft is, throw the net out a little bit wider. Same with the guys involved in the cryptids. I'm not saying the cryptids are on board these craft, but it's the location. In my opinion, location is key. And you know, the primary locations are the places to do the research. I'm not saying that things don't happen elsewhere. It's probably like throwing a stone into a pond and it ripples out and everywhere gets a little touch of it. But the prime location, such as the place that you're really interested in, Skinwalker, it's a prime location. That is the place to do the detailed study. And don't limit yourself to, not you, UFOs, cryptids. Just embrace it and just see what's coming through.
Yeah, I mean, in your experience, let's say you're a cryptid researcher, you're looking for werewolves or Bigfoot or something, you're going to run into UFOs at some point. Same thing for UFO people. They're looking for flying saucers. They're going to find Bigfoot, cryptids, mutilations.
Without a doubt, and it seems silly to not embrace that phenomena and look into it with a serious eye. And I could briefly tell you, there's a forest up the top end of North Yorkshire called Pinchenthorpe Forest. I'll keep it quick, George, because I don't know what time we've got. But a guy took 2 children in camping, set his tent up beside a wall in the forest. This is 2014, I believe. They did a bit of exploring, had a bit of food. He told his children to take their shoes off before they got into the tent, which they did, got into the tent. He woke up feeling uneasy in the early hours of the morning. Well, no, it weren't actually early hours, but after they'd gone to sleep. And he just felt strange. And then he said he heard a twig snap. He said, and then the zip came down on the tent. He said, and I've only got a knife with me. He says, I pulled the knife out. He says, and a very thin, hairy, humanoid looking thing come through and went towards my children. He said, and it looked, and so I was looking at it, touched me on the forehead and I blacked out. The next thing I remember, I'm being carried across a field with my children to a UFO. I mean, I'm not telling these stories and expecting everybody to believe me. This is a first-hand account. I'm not saying it's gospel truth. The guy sounded sincere. He says, I came to in the UFO, being carried, and I got touched again, and I was blacked out. He says, the next thing we woke up, we're in the tent, and I thought, I've had a really, really weird dream. That was a bizarre night. And then the children woke up and said, Dad, we got carried across a field by hairy Chewbaccas last night. Yeah, seriously. He said, and when we looked in the tent, it was covered in sludge and leaves. So it's a strange story. That's the only one I've ever had with the the actual cryptid kind of connected to the UFO, but there doesn't seem no end to it. And the more people that are coming forward now, it's just incredible. One thing that they know they can trust me, because I won't divulge a name if I'm told not to. But and I don't want to believe everything I'm told. I get some stories and I say, "Oh, thank you very much. They were really interesting," and I'll never follow it up. I'm not being rude, but it's not gripped me. But right. A lot of these do, George.
Tell me about tell our viewers about your books, your website, so that people can find you and see your work.
Yeah, well, the books are called Truth Proof. 1 second, because I never normally. I really don't, but they're there. So I haven't got number 1 on me. So obviously that's number 2. That's number 3. That's me stood beside some standing stones at a former RAF Bempton that were part of a project in the war called Project Winkle, and the Night People. And they've got, have a look on back of them, people. Don't take my word for it. Read the reviews. That's what I would say, because anybody can brag about a book and say it's great. And I'm not about that. I'm not bothered if you don't buy me books. I'm here to impart the knowledge of what I've got. I'm not an expert, George. I like to get first-hand accounts and give the witness the best shot I can at relaying and telling that truth.
Your website provides a lot of this information for free. I mean, people can go on there and read the individual cases. It's highly detailed, one by one, of all the different incidents.
Yeah, it's truthproof.uk. And if you're interested in the books, by all means, contact me. I don't mind signing them, whatever. And the book 5 is out probably in a few months. Truth Proof, the Fantasy of Reality.
Paul, it's always great to talk to you. I hope that when you finish the Wolflands film, you'll come back and we can talk about that.
It will be a pleasure, George. I'm honored. Thank you very much.